Hello, dear. How does it feel to be an emotional human being? Have you radically accepted yourself as such yet? Today, you will learn about fear of emotions. You have to acknowledge it to overcome it. When you understand what actually happens in human life regarding emotions, it makes sense to be a little intimidated or even feel fear of emotion. Your brain wasn't fully developed in childhood. During your formative years, the capacity for judgment and the ability to self-soothe was beyond your grasp. These capacities expanded as you grew. Experts say your frontal lobe, the part of the brain that processes cause and effect and logic, doesn't fully form until you are in your 20s. Without the part of your brain that helps you judge and reason, you have no accessible internal way to modulate distressing feelings. Before your wise 20s, you were completely at the mercy of your emotions. Without the ability to label emotions, you lack even the small comfort of recognizing the other people that feel the way you do, terrified, overwhelmed, and scared. It makes sense that emotions were so scary then. There's so much that I could go into in this aspect of learning emotions. Unfortunately, if your parents are not aware of their own emotions or cannot really say what they are feeling, they don't know how to feel them or label them, it's very difficult to teach a young child. It's not uncommon, no matter what stage of life, that people don't know how to describe or label or understand their emotions. Then there's a whole world of having a child learn to self-soothe when they're quite young, having them cry themselves to sleep, etc. All of these parenting strategies, or lack thereof really, make a major impact on your emotional intelligence, also known as emotional quotient, or EQ, and your ability to be with, process, and understand your emotions. When you were a baby, you were a stew of sensations bubbling up and often over and over falling into exhausted sleep after minutes or hours of crying your heart out. The slightest thing could set you off. As children, your emotions are the monsters you can't cram back into the closet. The demons that reach out to drag you under your bed. The creepy ghost outside the window that threatens safe sleep and sweet dreams. Your young self lacked both cognitive ability to comprehend that emotions are only aspects of your totality and sufficient personal history to recognize their transient nature. In fear, you experienced your emotions. Even when you wait for their return, you were fearful. Even as adults, some people feel emotionally fragile. Emotions continue to loom large. Experiencing emotions won't kill you, won't drive you crazy, or ruin your well-oiled life. Experiencing emotions will carry you to a better place. When you have the security to trust emotions as inner guides and the conviction that they're here to help, fear dissolves and curiosity opens your heart. You need patience to listen and the courage to hear. Sigmund Freud, a rather well-known voice in the beginnings of psychology and its study, believed in something called the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle states that humans move towards pleasure and away from pain. The theory is that human beings have an innate internal drive that propels us towards what feels good, and an equal drive that repels us from what feels bad. We can even use a CAT scan to view the parts of the brain that researchers call our pleasure and pain centers. That is, the area that lights up when exposed to pleasurable and painful sensations. Humans naturally prefer enjoyable emotions like joy, delight, contentment, ecstasy, happiness, excitement, love, to distressing ones like hate, despair, remorse, powerlessness, loneliness, anxiety, or frustration. It would seem that all emotions are not created equal. It's evident that some emotions lift us up and others drag us down. And you know which ones are going to win a popularity contest and which ones will be the losers. On a deeper level, all emotions are created equal because each has the same function: to transmit information. Some come in a more attractive package than others. If you're determined to only feel good and never feel bad, you're obstructing emotions from doing their job. If you're screening out the upsetting ones, you're not doing your job of letting them teach you what you need to know. In my work as a behavioral health dietitian, I find a huge correlation between people running from misunderstanding, not being able to decipher or label their emotions, and disordered eating, restricting, overeating, binging, and more severe disorders like anorexia or bulimia. When I work on feelings and emotions and understanding them with my patients, they get a much deeper grasp of behavior in their disordered eating being a result of that fear of emotion. Though this is not the only part of these disorders, it is a major one. It's also a part of my Project Love Me ebook because I believe that the E for emotion and the F for feeling in the self-awareness alphabet are essential to understanding yourself. The more you learn why you avoid your emotions, the better your chance of learning to accept each one with an open heart. The irony is, if you give them a chance, your deepest heartaches might just pave the way to your greatest happiness. You have emotional reactions to almost everything you think, do, say, imagine, and remember, which means you have emotions about your emotions. Many times it's your emotions about your emotions, what are called secondary emotions, that are the most troubling and cause the most discomfort. Secondary emotions are reactions, usually unconscious and judgmental to the primary emotions. You're angry at yourself for being jealous of your sister, scared that you're too insecure to change jobs, ashamed that you still feel upset about self-destructive behaviors that you used to do to yourself. There are any number of examples of secondary emotions making you feel worse than primary emotions. Growing up in this culture, even with parents who have a reasonable emotional intelligence, you often find yourself caught up in a judgmental secondary emotion. Society values a stiff upper lip and glorifies the macho ideals of playing down feelings, going it alone, and being in control. This only exacerbates emotional pain in the long run and prevents it from being healed. What is truly healthy and healing, feeling deeply, is seen as unhealthy, while that which is actually unhealthy, pretending not to have pain, is valued as healthy. If secondary emotions didn't exist, you'd be neutral about whatever you feel. Reactions to emotions would tilt neither one way or the other. You would say to yourself, okay, so I'm furious, hurt, sad, helpless, anxious, confused. So what? I feel what I feel. You would not punish yourself, insult yourself, or be critical of yourself in any other ways. You wouldn't have harsh self-critiques, and you wouldn't say, I should feel X. You would no longer measure yourself against an inhuman standard of perfection. It's hard enough to cope with primary feelings, which have to be felt, even if painful, to help and heal. This is impossible if you insist on constantly criticizing how it goes on in your inner world. You cannot control everything that you feel. You can certainly tone down the judgments. Secondary emotions are based on faulty logic and irrational beliefs and often function well below our level of awareness. In this culture, we all have them to greater or lesser extent, which means we all need to practice keeping internal negative chatter to a minimum. You learn to fear your emotions. I like to distill learning down to 3 different ways we learn: by being taught directly, we learn by observing, and we learn by our own personal experience. Aside from cultural messages you picked up along the way from your teachers, extended family, clergy, neighborhoods, media, celebrities, books, politicians, and the medical world, most of what you believe about emotions comes from your parents or primary caregivers. The long list I just gave would be those you observe or are indirectly taught by, meaning things that you pick up and you hear in advertisements, etc. Your parents and your school teachers are people that directly taught you things. Your parents and or caretakers that you had in your very young years taught you to fear emotions. Your first lesson came from observing how people closest to you handled their emotions. In many families, emotions are never discussed. I know in my personal experience, I lost my mother when I was 21 years old, and the rest of my family, both immediate and extended, went on with life as usual, and to this day, don't really talk about her. I'm very into understanding and expressing feelings, so it was a really strange and difficult time for me and my life. Processing emotions had already come to the surface as a need and desire, and a part of me that I wanted to learn more about. Meanwhile, feelings were wrong and should not be expressed to everyone in my immediate circle. Many of you associate strong emotions with fighting or even physical harm, confusing feeling angry with behaving angrily. You may have had a parent whose feelings constantly overflowed and burdened, frightened and embarrassed others, especially young you, when they unloaded. Maybe you wanted to clap your hands over your ears and hide in a corner whenever they let loose. Somewhere along the way, you then made an unconscious decision to never lose control of your emotions and embarrass yourself or scare others in this way. If you were raised in a family where your parents constantly argued, any level of conflict might frighten you now. Although you're safe as an adult because you're no longer dependent on your battling parents, the fragile child inside still withdraws or becomes paralyzed around interpersonal tension and conflict. Your household may also have appeared healthy and normal, but you were frequently scolded for expressing unhappiness or encouraged to always look at the bright side. If you were told to stop crying or fussing, be a good girl or good boy, not make such a huge deal out of things, quit being such a baby, it impacted your emotional expression as life continues. If your parents insisted that you had to be sunshine, the message you received was that negative emotions were wrong and that you better keep a lid on them if you want to get along or, unfortunately, be loved by others. You became an expert of what psychology calls acting as if, by enclosing your authentic self in a public shell designed to please the crowd. In families where your caregivers could say whatever they pleased, but jumped down your throat every time you piped up, you were given a double message. It's okay for other people to express their emotions, but you are not allowed to express yours. If your parents gave you the silent treatment whenever you displayed irritation or sadness, you might believe that your anger or grief always leads to rejection, abandonment, and withdrawal of love. Invalidating comments like, "Of course you don't feel like that," or "You shouldn't feel that way," might cause you to doubt and mistrust your inner voice. If you were told repeatedly by someone in authority that you did not feel what you knew you felt, you probably ended up a very confused little boy or little girl. Until the message was revised somewhere along the way, you may have grown up into and still be a very confused man or woman. If you watched a parent that you knew was unhappy pretend to be happy, you might not have known what to think. Do you believe what your parent says or your gut intuition? You receive training in everything from driving a car to take SATs, but nowhere are you formally schooled on how to handle emotions. When you are young, you watch what big people do and respond according to their expectations. You haven't the foggiest idea whether they are instructing you well or poorly. When I talk to clients about their experiences when they're young, I always say, no matter how good, bad, or between, or amazing, or depressing your childhood was, childhood is a prison. You only know your four walls, meaning you only know what you're exposed to. You don't know that there are different things out there. You don't know whether what you're seeing is correct or helpful or incorrect or unhelpful. You have no idea you are being taught at all. But frankly and unfortunately, sometimes neither do your caretakers. Like a good little soldier, you become well-trained. Often by the time you're ready to go to school, and unless you learn something in the contrary about how to handle your emotions, you grow up with attitudes that are strikingly similar to those of your parents. These attitudes may not be workable or can even be destructive. This usually fails to occur to you until you find yourself drinking, using drugs, overeating, intentionally starving, ruining relationships, lacking friends or intimacy, or anxious and depressed. At some point, you realize that all is not well in the land of emotions. If you're lucky enough to believe it's okay to get help, you find someone, a friend, a professional to talk with about your situation. If you were taught that emotions should be kept private because they're shameful and make you vulnerable, you suffer in silence. Ideal emotional schooling will have a child understand that it's okay to be angry, that someone cares about your feelings, that other people can take responsibility for causing hurt, and that feelings are natural and acceptable. It's important for feelings and emotions to be interpreted well. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence, some intuition, and a lot of empathy to be able to do that. In this fast-paced world, there's not a lot of time for it. It's also important for children to learn that emotional states are for the time being. They don't last forever. Whatever model of parenting or caretaking you had will have a direct and decisive bearing on how you feel about your emotions today. Sometimes you have no idea about what you learned in childhood being unhealthy until your emotions are treated respectfully. It's often a therapist or coach who is the first person who listens to someone's emotions. Not only listens, but the first person to validate, understand, explore, explain, support, and soothe. I've created some amazing bonds with patients and clients as a coach, a DBT therapist, and a registered dietitian who works in behavioral health nutrition because I found this to be true. Some of my patients and clients are in their 40s and 50s and even 60s, and they haven't had this experience in life. I myself had my emotions first explained to me by a therapist in my late 20s, and I am greatly appreciative of that woman for doing so for me. I had to go through quite a bit and really hit that wall in order to get myself into a therapist's office, however. And I'm the one who loves my emotions. You can see there's a lot of reasons why you might dampen your emotions. You do not allow emotions to come to the surface, and from that, you don't understand them nor have the ability to label them. Learning to accept your emotions first requires that you acknowledge that as a person who intentionally and regularly engages in avoidance and or behaviors that blunt your emotions, you most likely have a negative view of uncomfortable emotions. This may not surprise you. For some of you, this may be shocking news, as you may not have seen your behaviors as a way to avoid distress. Second, you have to identify exactly what you believe about your emotions. A belief, sometimes called a cognition, is what you hold to be true about yourself in the world. Let's call it your truth, but not necessarily the truth. You internalize beliefs in childhood and tend to cling to them even when they're not working for you. As you consider your beliefs, try to remember the exact phrases your parents used when responding to your distress. I remember my father used to joke in a very uncomfortable way when my brothers were picking on me. I have an older and a younger brother, both of which are a lot larger than me. My dad used to come into the room when they were pulling my hair or pinching me and say, "Fight nice, children," and then leave the room. In those experiences, I learned that I should be tough, and I was not allowed to cry, and I was not allowed to ask for help. I was actually scared of my brothers. At times when I am really trying to have a tough upper lip, I think about my dad saying, "Fight nice, children," and realizing how negating that felt to me at the time. I refuse to be that negating with myself. If you can think of an example of your parents' words, I would like to suggest that they are lodged in your head today, wreaking all sorts of havoc. Notice, in particular, your beliefs that are unhealthy and irrational, the ones that don't contribute to emotional balance and resilience, to being an authentic person, to trusting yourself, to enjoying intimacy in relationships and having positive associations with life experience and perhaps your own body. Third, you make a conscious, ongoing effort to change your beliefs. That means developing your own cognition about emotions. It doesn't matter what anyone else believed way back when or what your partner or friends believe now. You no longer have to have the lights out at 8 p.m. You certainly don't have to take someone else's word for the right way to view emotions. You're one of the big people now, and you can choose to believe whatever you please. When I ask you to accept your uncomfortable emotions, I'm not suggesting that you walk around in a perpetual state of hatred, gloom, or shame. Acceptance does not mean letting your emotions run you ragged or having a field day with other people. It does not imply that you must like having unsettling and sometimes acutely wounding emotions. It merely requires that you acknowledge the hurt and give unpleasant feelings the right to come and go, just as you do the pleasant ones. You'll remember that you have to radically accept what you're feeling. Effective emotional management starts with a sound, rational belief system. That means digging deep not only into your assumptions about emotions, but into understanding how these beliefs have shaped your emotional life and dysfunctional behaviors. For example, if you believe that emotions make you vulnerable and weak, you won't be able to stop pushing them away, no matter how hard you try. If you believe that emotions are natural, that they provide you with valuable information about yourself and your life, and that you can handle whichever ones come along, You'll be paving the way to healing your dysfunctional relationships with emotions once and for all. You cannot change behavior without changing the causes of behavior. In this instance, the belief underlying it. It takes a lot to transform your perspective, including motivation, awareness, time, patience, and practice. Accepting your emotions, however painful they are, is the key to ending dysfunctional behaviors and to achieving the health, happiness, success, and deep satisfaction about life that you want and that you deserve. I hope that you learned a little bit in this lesson about why you fear your emotions. And I hope that you see that with understanding, you have access to releasing that fear.